Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. My name is Valerie Kirka, and I am a community engagement coordinator with the Peace Corps Community for Refugees, and I am a former Peace Corps volunteer where I served in Tanzania. I have the privilege today to welcome all of you to this event, Standing Together, a dialogue on refugees and immigration with the 2018 National Teacher of the Year, Mandy Manning. We are joined by several tremendous guests who will share their knowledge and insights into the experience of refugees and immigrants. We're also joined by an audience through a live stream, and then we're also joined by all of you. So as we get started, in this room, could you please raise your hand if you're a former, or as we say, returned Peace Corps volunteer? We also call ourselves RPCVs. Who here is a current or former Peace Corps staff? Okay. Who here is a teacher or an educator? Great. And so we see we're coming together with different backgrounds, and some of you may not have raised your hand, but please also let me ask, who here is a refugee or an immigrant, or is a second or third generation of immigrants? Okay. And then how many of you personally know a refugee or an immigrant? Yeah, a lot of you. Great. So as we can see, a commonality that we have is around our experience and interactions with refugees and immigrants in our communities. In the greater Washington area, about 1.4 million people are foreign-born. Zooming out a bit, the number of international migrants worldwide has continued to grow rapidly in recent years, reaching 258 million people in 2017. And today, we are facing the worst refugee crisis in recorded history. According to the UNHCR, 68.5 million people around the world have been forced from home. Among them are nearly 25.4 million refugees, over half of whom are under the age of 18. The United States has historically been a global resettlement leader, but unfortunately, last week, President Trump announced a refugee ceiling of 30,000 refugees to arrive in the US fiscal year 2019, a new historic low. Now, more than ever, action is needed for people affected by conflict, climate change, economic hardship, and persecution. We hope you leave this evening motivated and inspired to support refugees and immigrants in the greater Washington, DC area. About 2.5 years ago, when the Syrian refugee crisis was at its peak, several members of the Peace Corps community, including current and former Peace Corps volunteers and current and former Peace Corps staff, came forward and asked, how can we help? And this is when a group of us came together and formed the Peace Corps Community for Refugees, with a firm conviction that RPCVs have the commitment, adaptability, and cross-cultural skills to make a significant contribution to this global humanitarian effort. We are a volunteer-based group that works to connect the Peace Corps community to refugee service opportunities internationally, domestically, and through advocacy. To date, we have worked through hundreds of RPCVs and well over 30 Peace Corps alumni groups nationally to support refugees and immigrants. Could members of the group please raise your hands if you're a member? We have some core members of our leadership team and other members in the room. And for those of you who didn't raise your hand at this time, we hope that you'll join us, whether you're an RPCV or not. Before introducing our first guest, I would like to take the opportunity to thank NYU DC and the Open Society Foundation for making this event possible. And we would also like to recognize the National Peace Corps Association, for without their support and our affiliation with them, our group would not be as strong as it is today. And now I have the honor to introduce Ms. Andrea Prejan, who is the Director of Teacher Quality for the National Education Association, the NEA. The NEA is the nation's largest professional employee organization and is committed to advancing the cause of public education. Each year, they award the National Teacher of the Year to outstanding and exemplary teachers. Ms. Prejan has led a distinguished career in education and is passionate about family engagement in schools. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Andrea Prejan.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here and to spend a little bit more time with Mandy. I hope everybody had a chance to shake her hand and say hello either now or afterwards, because it is quite a pleasure. I could start by telling you that she's a nationally board certified teacher, that she chose to become an accomplished teacher, but I'm not going to actually tell you that. I could tell you that she has chosen to advocate for her colleagues as both an officer in her local association, that she was a delegate at our representative assembly, all of those wonderful things that she does, but I'm not going to tell you any of that either. How many of you have given a speech? Your sister's wedding, your brother's wedding, someone's funeral, someplace you've given a speech. We've all given a speech, and we often are nervous. Even those of us who are giving a 3-minute speech, and I have 2 minutes and 45 seconds, you might be a little bit nervous. So this summer in Minnesota, in front of 10,000 teachers, bus drivers, school secretaries, counselors, Mandy invited 2 young women to come and talk there and tell us their story. And they accepted her invitation. They came, they talked about their immigrant experience, one who had only been in the United States for 3 months. They spoke, they told us our story, they told us what they wanted for their families, what they wanted for themselves, what they wanted for their communities, how proud they were to be Americans and to be in the United States, and how concerned they were about the relative environment that they saw themselves in. Mandy's the type of educator that inspires, excites, and understands what her students are going through, understands her role as an educator, as an advocate for her students, and for her colleagues, and for her profession. We are ever proud at NEA to know that she is a Spokane, see, I got that right, a Spokane officer with the Spokane Education Association, a member of the Washington Education Association, and a member of the National Education Association. Please welcome the 2018 Teacher of the Year, Mandy Manning.
So that was pretty much amazing. Thank you. It's always weird to hear about yourself because you're like, what? It's just everyday life, but it's cool. And an honor. And I will never forget that experience at the NEA-RA because it's so powerful to hear students' stories straight from them, and you're going to hear from a student, an individual right after me. And so I'll hurry up to get to her because that's going to be the real star of the night. So first of all, thank you for inviting me here to be with you this evening. It's such an honor every time I have the pleasure of being surrounded by people filled with hope and the motivation to make this a more welcoming nation. And that includes Peace Corps volunteers, former Peace Corps volunteers, returned, and those who believe in and support this valuable program, future Peace Corps volunteers, I hope, and then those who just really are interested in welcoming and helping our brand new citizens to our nation, immigrants and refugees. In a time when it can be difficult to make sense of the world, Peace Corps gives me hope. Volunteers serve as ambassadors for the United States worldwide, and then bring back those experiences and share them right here with our nation. This is true diplomacy. Connecting cultures and recognizing the value and beauty of every community and every individual. My experience as a Peace Corps volunteer truly shifted my trajectory and influenced who I am and how I participate in the world. Ultimately, that experience brought me right here to where I am today. So it may come as a surprise that the National Teacher of the Year never intended to be a teacher. I wanted to be a filmmaker. I had visions on impacting the world through cinema, but I quickly learned that my personality wasn't a very good match for filmmaking. I needed to have daily access to hope. So in 1998, I applied to the Peace Corps and was invited to serve in Armenia. So there I am. My service began in 1999 and ended in 2001. I'm a bit embarrassed to admit that when I started my journey, I didn't know where Armenia was on the map. And that is really embarrassing to admit, especially for a teacher. However, in my 2 short years of service, I had so many experiences that challenged my perceptions and opened me up to the whole world around me. Our changes to the presentation didn't work. It opened the whole world to me, not to mention brought geography to life. So I remember the discomfort and the struggle of adjusting to life in a new country and culture, the experience of being a newcomer, and how much help I needed to navigate that transition. Peace Corps challenged my perceptions, broadened my perspectives, and taught me about connections and building relationships. And my deepest connection to this day is with my host family, who I lived with when I first came to Armenia. They gave me grace in adapting to life in Armenia, took my hand, and helped me to navigate my new environment. And that was a huge lesson for me and helped me to be the educator that I am today. And there's my host family right there. And some of my most vivid memories come from the discomfort and challenge of moving to and living in a culture different from my own. Getting my first haircut during training was quite the experience. I knew so little Armenian at the time, so it was hilarious trying to communicate what I wanted. But mostly I remember the patience of the stylist who was cutting my hair, because she just went along with me. It was pretty funny, though, because by the end of my haircut, I think the entire neighborhood had come to watch. I must have been quite the spectacle. I also remember marshutni rides, that's the public transportation, with total strangers and sharing food with one another. One such experience ended in a pretty bad case of giardia. That one is particularly poignant because I distinctly remember only 2 things about that experience. I remember, of course, the stomach issues and the not remembering like 3 days of my life. But I mostly remember the joy of making a connection with strangers at a rest stop. I remember watching my new friend wash the carrot using water from a tap right out of the ground and accepting that carrot and eating it, and how much joy was in that moment. And that's really what I remember. So that memory sparks vivid memories of the various bathrooms I encountered as well. This is always a hot topic during Peace Corps. I also remember the simple tasks that became such a challenge: collecting water once a week, shopping in the market, doing my laundry by hand, and basically becoming comfortable with discomfort. Peace Corps really challenged my perception of comfort and happiness. And for the first time, I realized that the 2 are not necessarily connected. And I think that's a really important concept right now. Peace Corps also launched me into a 20-year career in education. I will never forget training and my teaching practicum. Back then, I was only just beginning to understand how to connect with my students and use the knowledge I gained from those connections to build engaging lessons. And when I look back at pictures of my teaching experience during training, I feel pride and I cringe a little bit. It's amazing how I could be so dialed in with one class and so completely out of touch with the other. Looking back, it's so obvious to me why my 5th grade class always seemed more engaged and excited than my 8th grade class. You can see that's my 5th grade class, and those sullen faces are my 8th grade class. And looking at the pictures now, it's clear. I connected with my students' lived experiences in one class and not in the other. For the 5th grade, I wrote new words to the song You Are My Sunshine, centered it on Armenia and keeping the beautiful areas of my students' nation clean. The students loved it. But with the 8th grade class, I taught America the Beautiful. No connection to Armenia at all. No wonder they were disengaged and wholly uninterested. I can see this now, but back then I was clueless. The thing is, it was everything that followed. My experience being the other and adjusting to life in Armenia that helped me to be the teacher I am now and opened me up to be able to see where I went wrong then and how not to go wrong now. I now teach in the Newcomer Center, a specialized English language development program at Ferris High School in Spokane, Washington. It makes me a little emotional to talk about it because number one, I don't get to be in the classroom right now. And number two, I have a very strong understanding of what it means to only have a ceiling of 30,000 refugees. Because in 2016-17, I had 33 students in the first semester and 28 in the second semester. This year, we are starting in the Newcomer Center with 8. 8 students. It's a little bit heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking for me because there's a chance that my program will not be open next year when I'm ready to go back. But it's more heartbreaking because there are so many people who need to find a safe place to live life. And as a nation as powerful and as large as the United States, we should be better. We should be more welcoming. So, I teach brand new immigrant and refugee students to our nation. I get to be their very first teacher. Every day, I apply the lessons I learned in the Peace Corps to impact the lives of my students and, in turn, be impacted by them. Peace Corps taught me so much. Peace Corps taught me so much about adjustment, to observe, to listen, and to learn before acting. Nowruz and Mohammed are siblings who came to the U.S. in 2016 from Syria. I was originally told they had only recently lost their hearing due to the violence in Syria. They both wore hearing aids, and they would soon be fitted with an AM/FM system to amplify my voice. However, as I waited for these amplification systems to arrive, I realized these students were not understanding anything I said, nothing their classmates said, and they were not producing any language or any sound. So I met with the family, and I learned that they had not just recently become deaf, as I had been told. They had actually been born deaf and were both profoundly deaf. I also learned they were not fluent in Arabic, and they did not know sign language. So essentially, these students had no language. I knew I had to adjust my teaching if I was going to meet the needs of these students. I also knew it would take something extra to help create community for them and to help them connect with their classmates and to feel like they belonged in our school. I began attending sign language classes with their family, and we soon began to learn basic sign language along with the foundational English we were learning in class, so they could communicate with their peers. Once they had the supports they needed, Nowruz and Mohammed took off. They're doing well in school. They have regular sign language instruction and interpreters who attend classes with them. And they both hope to attend Gallaudet University to become sign language instructors. Because Peace Corps taught me to not make assumptions and to adjust based on observations and experience, I was able to meet my students where they were and help them grow. Peace Corps also taught me to be open to who a person is as an individual. We can't generalize based on culture, country, religion, or any other group to which we believe a person belongs. We must allow people to show us who they are. And that means putting our own perceptions and biases aside. This lesson was invaluable when Hussein walked into my classroom. He was a refugee from Iraq, and he was 20 years old. I had to set aside any of my ideas about older students, or time limits, or how we could possibly meet his needs in 1 year. Instead, I simply listened and observed. I learned that Hussein was motivated and that he'd purposely chosen to attend high school instead of going to the adult education program because he believed he would learn more about American culture and have more opportunities to practice English at high school. I also learned that he had cut hair for the U.S. Army and that his dream was to become a stylist. Because I waited and allowed Hussein to show me who he was before making any assumptions about an educational plan for him, I was able to get him into a cosmetology program at the Skills Center. He attended classes there in the morning and then came to the Newcomer Center in the afternoon, where we studied what he learned together. And by the close of the year, he had several hours toward his license. It took a couple more years, but in 2016, he graduated from cosmetology school and is a practicing stylist. He is the one right there. He took me from hair down to here to this hairstyle now. I didn't make assumptions about Hussein. I let him show me who he was and created an education plan and provided support to help him achieve his dream. One final lesson that Peace Corps taught me was the power of an individual. Peace Corps is the model of empowerment. I learned the value of my own voice and gained the confidence to assert that voice. That lesson has been invaluable to me as an educator, not only because I am confident in using my voice for my colleagues and my students, but also because I understand the importance of empowering my students too, and giving them the skills and confidence to use their own voices. Safa came to my classroom in 2012. She's this one right here. As a refugee from Sudan. When she arrived at 15 years old, she only had a 4th grade education. So as a high school freshman, she was expected to graduate in 4 years. Despite being a newcomer and knowing little English. So with the confidence she gained and the welcome she received through her first semester spent in the Newcomer Center, and the support of her educators throughout her high school career, Safa did just that. She graduated in 4 years and is now a junior at university studying to be an elementary school teacher. Beyond helping Safa to succeed in high school, I also helped her to find her voice, as I try to do for all of my students. I recently took a group of former students to our state capitol, and Safa was one of them. During that trip, Safa testified to the House and Senate K-12 committees on behalf of herself and other English language learners in Washington state. She is an empowered advocate who knows the strength of her voice and the importance of using it. Just as I took that lesson from the Peace Corps into my classroom, Safa will do the same for her students. We have so much to learn from these amazing individuals we are welcoming into our nation. As Peace Corps volunteers, we are uniquely qualified to welcome them. We all know the true goal of the Peace Corps, and it's not the job assignment. It's cultural exchange and exposure to that which is different and beautiful. The lessons I learned in the Peace Corps, I have carried every day throughout my career. Peace Corps is not simply development. it's diplomacy. Volunteers create connections and build relationships to make our world stronger. Sometimes we think power and fear gives us the upper hand around the world, but it's really not. It's how we build relationships with one another, how we show we care, and then in turn receive care. Because of my experience in the Peace Corps, I am more open to different ways of being, thinking, and doing, and I take those lessons and those skills into my classroom every day. Peace Corps, in its mission of cultural exchange and connection, shows us we must build bridges rather than walls. Be welcoming, show love, and build strong, safe communities through connections. We are in the dark. Thank you. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I am honored beyond belief to be here. Thank you, Peace Corps, Community for Refugees, and thank you, Ms. Manning, for giving me this opportunity. My name is Veronica. When I came to the U.S. from my small town in Bolivia in 2015, I barely spoke English. And here I am tonight, giving a speech in English. As many newcomers to this country, my life has been full of challenges, but I have prepared for dealing with obstacles ever since I can remember. When I was 6, I learned to live without the presence and love of my parents, share my food with 13 cousins, went to sleep with a growling stomach, and bravely wore my big brother's hand-me-downs. These experiences trained me to move forward to reach my goals. In 2015, I left Bolivia to reunite with my mother and brother. I made a 20-day journey from Bolivia to Texas. I hid in buses, trucks, and private cars. We walked through the freezing water of the Rio Grande without our clothes, which we carry in a plastic bag. Of course, we also had to dodge the police a few times. Some of us had to hide inside a trash can. In Texas, I ended up in an underground house, but with 30 men. I did not sleep that night. Eventually, I was able to make my way to my final destination here at the Washington, D.C. in the Washington, D.C. area. At first, my mother wanted me only to work instead of going to school. But I finally convinced her. I enrolled in high school. I had to work hard to improve my English, to pass state exams, and to earn a U.S. diploma in 2 years. I am now about to finish at the community college and will soon continue my education in business at a local university. In addition to studying, I have continued to work 20 to 30 hours a week as a housekeeper, a waitress, a pre-cook, a hairdresser assistant, a restaurant manager, and an installer of tiles. In so many ways, I have been lucky. I have had teachers acknowledge my abilities and lead me to the joys of scholarships, which allow me access to higher education without worrying about the extravagant cost of tuition. My story is similar to stories of newcomers like me. We show persistence and grit. We are dreamers. We believe in the American dream. But I'm the lucky one tonight because I'm here. Please let me represent all the hardworking newcomers that have had no voice. They too deserve to be acknowledged. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your kind words, and thank you, Mandy, for your wonderful presentation. And now we're going to transition. We'll continue our dialogue with our panel by hearing from an immigrant who arrived just a year ago with his family and representatives of 2 major refugee resettlement agencies. The facilitator of our panel is Pat Nyan. She is a former journalist and true communications professional. Pat is a core member of the advocacy and communications team for the Peace Corps Community for Refugees. Pat served in the Peace Corps in Afghanistan and has mentored Afghan refugees in Maine and here in the Washington, D.C. area. Pat, take it away. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's so fantastic to see so many people coming here caring about this issue. It certainly is with us every single day in the nation's capital here, but all across the country, we know that people are concerned and want to welcome immigrants and refugees. It's not always apparent to them how they can help, though. So on our panel, we hope to give you some idea of some ways you can help. We'd like to hear from you afterwards. Maybe you've had some experiences that you could share, too. On our panel, we have two different perspectives. One is from a recent immigrant, and the other is from 2 wonderful major refugee resettlement agencies, HIAS and Lutheran Social Services. I'll introduce Hassan Mosaferi first. He's here. He came here a year ago with his wife Faiza and their 2 children on a special immigrant visa because they had worked for a contractor of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And now everything seems to be working out so beautifully for them, but the very first week they were here, my team from the All Souls Unitarian Church Refugee Support Group, we just knew immediately they were going to be an immigrant success story. They just embodied the drive and determination of so many immigrants we know. Next we have Liz Mandelbaum from HIAS and Jennifer Cormany. I'm sorry, I haven't met them before tonight, but they can describe what they do, but they each have a slightly different perspective. Jennifer is the Director of Family Services for the Lutheran Social Services, and Liz is the Director of Advocacy and Public Policy. So we can talk about family issues and how we can help people in a direct way, as well as advocacy issues that have really come to the fore lately in our Peace Corps Community for Refugees group since the reduction of refugee admissions, where we had concentrated a lot of our focus in our first year, but we've necessarily shifted over to doing more and more advocacy. About myself, just briefly, I did join this group almost 2 years ago now, motivated by what I was hearing Islamophobia, and my Peace Corps service was in Afghanistan, a country I dearly love. I mean, once you've had that Peace Corps experience for 2 years in another culture and come to love the people and the culture, it hit all of us hard, especially those of us who had served in Muslim countries. So I heard about this group and thought that was a way I could become engaged with the issue and hope to actually help refugees, as I had done once up in Maine, where I lived in the 1980s. And we had a small wave of Afghan refugees coming through then from the wars, the war already going on in Afghanistan. And I mentored a widow and her children up there. And it was very tough for her coming here. And anyway, she found a friend in my family, and it was such a tremendously rewarding experience that I always hoped I could do that again. So when I heard that All Souls Unitarian Church was going to be pairing up with the Lutheran Social Services and sponsoring a family, I was so thrilled, and even more thrilled when it turned out to be an Afghan family. So with that, Hassan, you've been here a little over a year. Can you tell us your story, please?
Yeah, hello everybody. Thank you very much for being here. As a supporter of immigrants and refugees, and you do a really great job for us. So, I grew up as an immigrant in another country, and when all of the war issues, the U.S. Army movement to Afghanistan started. Before starting all of the story, I want to say, I speak English as second language. If there is anything, with my word, and if there is anything that I'm saying doesn't make any sense for you, I'm so sorry because of that. So, yeah. So, when all of those happens after September happened in Afghanistan, so I moved to Afghanistan and started a job on a new construction companies that just starting the work without any experience because of the U.S. Army. I had a opportunity to work with as a subcontractor for the U.S. Army for something like 10 years, and after that, when you work for the U.S. Army in Afghanistan, there are some people who don't want to see you around. Maybe when those happens, happen after 2014, that we heard that U.S. Army want to move from Afghanistan and get back to the country, so those problems increased. And at that moment, I believe I should find another destination. If all of those happened, so I would not be able to have a really good life in Afghanistan because of all of my experience. If you work for the U.S. Army, after a few years, everybody will recognize you, and they see you, and you will not be able to move across the country everywhere that you want to go. So that's why I applied for a cyber program, and after all of the procedures, so I'm here to the United States. So I had the experience in accounting, but when I moved to the United States, I have to work for something like a year on a field that was not my expertise to pay my bills. It's happened. When you move to the United States, nobody recognizes your experience, your education, your background. So I started working as a solar installer for a lot of schools, recreation centers all across the DC. So I just recently accepted another job offer, get back to my field as an accountant. So right now I'm really happy. This is my story until this date. So that's one of the points that I want to talk about. I don't want to really talk about the problems. If you go detail in the problems, you everywhere can find some problems. So I really want to talk about some, how can I say it, some points that we can help refugees like me to find a better life here in the United States. So maybe I should take the time for this way. After that, we get back to those points.
Would you like to do it that way?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. So Hassan is here on a special immigrant visa. I'm sure his family's experience hasn't been any easier, though, than for any other refugee or immigrant. I'm interested in hearing a little bit about the families, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the challenges that any refugee family or immigrant family faces when they come here through your agency, and what are the top challenges that we could keep in mind if we want to help them settle in?
I appreciate that question, Pat. Again, I'm Jennifer Cormier with Lutheran Social Services, and we are one of the smaller organizations in the area, but we do have a connection through the affinity through Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services, or LIRS. Some members in the refugee immigration world are familiar with LIRS. So very much as Hassan is saying, is employment is by all means still one of the largest areas of concern that we have when families come to the U.S., meaning concern around how to find them employability that is also sustainable. So outside of looking at does their degree or their college degree translate to what a U.S. program would look like, it's certainly then looking as Hassan has noted, he came as an accountant. However, that was unable to translate directly. So family members, in order to as well sustain in this community, which is high, you know, it has housing is very high in this metropolitan area. We find that it is certainly our greatest need to find job developers. That is one thing that our organization is we hone in on very quickly in terms of not only for our staffing, but certainly in looking at volunteer opportunities when individuals in the community have a certain career path that they've taken and have some opportunity to come to our agency, either in Maryland or Virginia, and be able to do some training, be able to do as well some outreach if it's to their own community of accountants or if it's to going out to other individuals and try to advocate on behalf of our families, individuals in order to find employability for them. That has been very helpful. Certainly looking at as well, so we have employability, and then again we have housing is the other opportunity that can be very challenging for our families. Not only the cost of housing, but certainly finding housing in a community that a family feels identified with. Certainly the District of Columbia and the surrounding areas are very diverse and that's where we see as a positive that we do have a lot of opportunities whereby we have communities that have strong Muslim faith or Christian faith or identities of Afghan families who can come into the community, and we have found housing services for them at what we try to find certainly at affordable cost to be able to have families reside there and then be able to as well work in those communities if possible. And then the third area is when families come, daycare is certainly an area of concern for cost primarily, and anybody who has children or had children certainly know that it certainly is a necessity in order to go out and work that your children then need to be cared for in an appropriate, licensed, stimulating environment of a daycare. And we find many times that our families that that's an area that we as well for volunteers have found when we are trying to provide, if it's doing some job training, if it's doing an ESOL class, if it's doing some level of empowerment for our families, that it's also very helpful then to as well have daycare services or some childcare services even for those moments when our families are coming to our services or we're going into their homes so that they can focus as the parents to be able to go off and do the necessary tasks. So I would say housing, jobs, and daycare.
Could I ask you about something I've been noticing more and more, just in news reports and talking to people who work with refugees, a new need that it's not new to those of you who are always dealing with refugees, but to some people might not realize that women staying at home with the children. Uh, Maybe they've got to work back around themselves, and daycare is just so tremendously expensive. There's one car in the family, maybe. Could there be programs for, or how could we help meet this need, which seems like just kind of a human need? We could organize ourselves to help with the child care and the women moving ahead in life, couldn't we?
Yeah, and I would say, Pat, when you speak of that, that is exactly one of the areas that we look at, is if there is a mother who is at home caring for the children, it could also mean that they need to have ESOL classes brought into the home. So we have providers who do go into our families' homes in order to do that, so that they can be home with the children, but as well, again, a number of volunteers then go into the home as well, not just for the teaching, but then also for the child care part of it. So the parent can then focus on what they need to. If it is a skill building, certainly outside of, certainly with English as a new language, but then in addition to that, if there are other things that would relate to them to have, then if it's a career path, whatever the next, I call them adventures, but whatever the next stage is for them in terms of being able to work outside of the house. If that in fact is what the family has decided, we certainly are sensitive to noting if that's a decision that the family is promoting as a sustainability, then we don't want to change that for them. But for families that we do have who have that need, and we know that daycare is the barrier, we certainly, and we do that. We also have just created at Lutheran Social Services a women's empowerment group. It's very much on the front end of its beginnings. So as you noted, this is something that has been in existence of an awareness for years, but we did see it as a higher need now. So we have as well volunteers who are female, often of the same nationality, cultural, and religious connection to that family, and they are going in and having women empowerment movement going on.
What about community events or pairing with other organizations? Like I think of the Rotary Club, an organization that our organization has a partnership with. We haven't actually done too much with them yet, but that's something we see as returned Peace Corps volunteers. Anyone can put on a community event like for World Refugee Day in June, or, I mean, these are chances for women, children, the whole family to get out, become more part of the community network.
Right, and we do those as well.
So a refugee resettlement agency can become involved in organizing something like that, or working, if I'm a community member and I call you up and say, you know, I know you're not getting that many refugees and immigrants coming in anymore, but we certainly have a lot in our community, and I'd like to figure out a way I can help.
We have actually, our time used to be a 90-day window for resettlement. We've had to become creative for those same reasons, and we've had families, and we can all attest to the fact any change of any even small matter in 90 days is a grave undertaking. So to imagine that a family is expected without any other support after 90 days to be able to sustain on their own is frightening. So we were able to actually, through other funding and through volunteers, truly, is to extend our program to a 5-year service for families. And we have extended them to other families within the community, as we've expanded with citizenship and immigration services that actually do not even have to be an individual who's come through our program and been a part of our family, that we've extended it to other individuals in other communities as people have brought them to our attention.
Are these some things people could read about on your website?
Yes, absolutely. lssnca.org.
Okay, that's great, thank you. So that's one level, the local kind of human-to-human, people-to-people level. But now we have this tremendous policy, constant change going on, and uncertainty that calls us to become advocates. So I'd like to ask you, Liz, what can we do as citizens to deal with the situation we're in so we can still manage to support and help refugees and immigrants.
Thanks, Pat, and thanks for hosting this important event. And where do I start with that? There's so much that we all can be doing. As Pat mentioned, I'm Director of Policy and Advocacy at HIAS. But before I was at HIAS, I worked in politics for over 10 years. And at a very basic level, the most important thing that everybody should be doing is contacting their elected officials, local, state, and federal. Some of the biggest changes we've seen on the positive side have been at the local and state level. It's easier to get things through at those levels right now. And as we all know, most communities are welcoming, despite what the newest policies are. And, working with elected officials at the local and state level to get welcoming resolutions passed. That would be an example of a piece of advocacy that could be worked on. But just at a very basic level, like I said, contacting your elected officials. One thing I want to point out is that in my experience, people who disagree with issues are much more likely to contact their elected officials. And we need people who are for refugee resettlement and for humane immigration policies to be reaching out to their members of Congress. I always like to tell people that you can't ignore a ringing phone if you're trying to work in a legislative office. It is important to reach out to your elected official, not to those, not to the district you don't belong to. And I've been asked a lot if it does actually matter, and it does. If you call or email or write your elected official, it is recorded. And I know that the legislator that I worked for actually used, the numbers that he had on either side to justify voting for or against something. And so that's the most basic thing that we can be doing right now is reaching out to members of Congress and then, like I said, also elected and state officials.
What about using the news media? We've had some campaigns on our website for certain issues, asking our members to write a letter to the editor, for example. How effective do you think that use of the traditional news media is?
We at HIAS use the news media as much as we can. Oftentimes we ask senior Jewish leaders to write op-eds or letters to the editor, and we focus particularly on legislative districts where we're trying to get the attention of a member who we either need to pay attention or whose views we disagree with. People think it's tough to write letters to the editor and op-eds. It's not once you get the hang of it, and there are a lot of tutorials online to do so. And I know that I oftentimes work with community members and volunteers to get those drafted and shopped around. I think that people are oftentimes under the assumption that if it's not in a big publication that it's not going to be influential, but if you're trying to reach your member of Congress, it's actually more important that it be placed in your local newspaper so that they see it.
That's a very interesting point. That's right, the local. As I understand it, it can be very effective. Now, maybe a lot of people aren't reading newspapers anymore. We think, well, that would not be effective. Or maybe your letter might not even get in the newspaper because they get so many. We encourage people on our website, we walk you through how to write such a letter, for example. But even if your letter doesn't get published, keep trying, because even the one that didn't get published will have an effect. It's the accumulation of all these letters on a certain issue that's been, the newspaper has been following, that the editor who's in charge of that will remember. So he's a gatekeeper, or she, and so it's having that kind of effect indirectly, you might say.
I would also add quickly, too, that social media is another huge way to advocate right now. We all know that this administration takes to Twitter quite often to outline new policies, and most officials within the administration have Twitter handles, and sending a simple tweet is also a good way to advocate, or posting something on Facebook.
Of course, if you're lucky enough to live in this area, you can actually go to the Capitol. And probably, when I moved here, I wasn't sure that I could ever do that. I didn't know how I would go about that. I eventually got to through the Peace Corps, which was great. But
And
how can somebody get engaged that way? It's so fascinating to do that.
well, you figure out who your representative is. You call the office, you say you're a constituent, and you set up a meeting. If you are a constituent, your elected official should meet with you. I know that it can be a bit discouraging for residents of DC, but that's where we always, it's still really important to meet with your elected officials. And then, of course, if you're from Virginia or Maryland, you have great representation, and you should be meeting with those members as well. Senator Cardin, for instance, is one of our biggest allies. But one thing that we also like to remind people of is the phone a friend idea. So if you feel discouraged because you live in DC, phone a friend and have them reach out to their elected officials wherever they live. And it's kind of a, it just gets more people engaged, and it's a good way for you yourself to feel like you're advocating. But if you live in this area, you simply have to call or email and ask for a meeting. As a former staffer, I will say that a lot of people feel discouraged if they have to meet with a staff person rather than the member themselves. I'll just tell you that we have a lot more time to pay attention to than the member. Staff are experts, whereas members are generalists. So that's something I also have to remind people about a lot, that meeting with a staff member sometimes is actually more useful than meeting with the member themselves.
I'd like to come back to Hassan for a minute.
I really want to come back.
We were talking earlier about his job seeking, and he made a very interesting point about immigrants coming and what programs there are to help them find jobs and how appropriate they are. Could you?
You know what? I'm a really simple guy. We speak simple. We have expertise in a policy here, so it's not my issue that I want to talk about. You all know better me how you can deal with all this stuff. I just want to talk about some simple, basic issues that nobody noticed that before. One of the issues is different type of job seeking for the immigrants. This is we have a word in an Afghan language. I don't know how can I translate it to the English that says, if you want to save a man's life for one day, just give him a fish. If you want to save his life forever, just teach him how to fish. So this is, I believe, how it should be with the job seeking. I really appreciate everything that Lutheran Service, social services did for immigrants. I really appreciate all of the volunteers, all of the supports, all of the, benefits that goes to the immigrant and help them to, I want to say, survive during the early days of moving to the United States. But I want to just add some more points on it, so maybe it would be helpful for the rest of immigrants. For most of the immigrants, especially in my country in Afghanistan, fighting to prepare the food for the family member is a really big challenge. But when they move to United States, they really need help to find a job, because here we don't have any food issues for actually nobody. So one of the points that I want to say, I had the experience to go through all the programs for the immigrants, for the trainings, all stuff. The first thing, let me go with an example about how the job seeking. I applied for the different jobs from the first time I moved to the United States to find a job that I really like to do. So I didn't get any feedback from something like 30, 100 application that I filled out. So I just get the job. It wasn't through my resume or through my job application. I found a network who helped me to get this job, and I really appreciate it. It helped me a lot to get more familiar with the U.S. culture. But the problem is, the problem was about my CV. Nobody. If I go to the details, when I joined another program named Upward Global, that they help immigrants to, with a professional background to get back to the field. Just let me give you some example of how they teach the people. One of the issues that he told me when I went through the program said was like that. On your resume, just add this point: I do not need any visa sponsorship. I fully authorized to work. And as a bonus, I can add I'm open to relocate. How this small piece is important for finding a job. When the employers go to the CV and you see the backgrounds all from the Afghanistan, the employers say, just the initial thinking of employers like that. This is a really good guy. I need him, but I don't want to be trouble with USSIC about all the, you may know better than me, all of the work authorization or visa sponsorship that sometimes would be really not costly, but should be really a lot of paperwork. So this single point is not a point that I be taught before. They are really good in a training, those people. So another issue, they teach how I, as a job seeker, should talk with my employer. As an Afghan, in our culture, we are not supposed to talk about ourselves. When you go to the job employer, if you talk just about yourself, they believe that you are not a modest person, and they're just thinking, oh, you're lying. But here in the United States, everybody want to see about yourself. They just need to, they literally, it's a real point. They literally teach me, how can I start the war? I did. I never used that word before, I did this, I did that, and the employer really like it, They really want to see you to talk about yourself and what you did to help your organization to grow. If I start say I was a member of the team who did this job, there's no point for me. Nobody put that as my credential. This is a really simple point that you as Americans have never, said, no, it's not a problem, It's a acceptable, point that everybody knows it. No, everybody, especially immigrants, Another point is, as a respect, we are not supposed to look at the eye of the person we are talking to, If the respect is it. Look at the ground, I respect you. But here, if you don't do that, if you don't look directly in the eye of your employer, they are not going to hire you. I don't know how you feel this stuff that I'm talking about is ridiculous, No, it's not. Somebody should not know about this basic stuff that's happened? I didn't know that. So I supposed to work as a accountant, but I didn't know that. So another thing that they really teach people how to deal is, as a par example, PAR. P as a problem or project, A as an action, and R as a result. I wish if I have my resume here from the first time that somebody as a volunteer helped me to prepare the Lutheran Social Service, and the resume after that Upward Group helped me to prepare. The first resume, I just put my, the soft skills, like I'm really, I'm really good at time management. I can do, well organized stuff like that. But the truth is, the employer right now don't want to hear about those stuff because they believe, the premise is like this: you already have those stuff, so you do not need to put it on the resume. So at the other point, I didn't know about it. I just put the general concept accounting, account payable, account receivable, professional financial statement. Everybody can do that. They wanted me to go in detail and prepare per example. I did. There was a problem like that. I have this issue, and I solve it like that, and the result was like that. They want to see the result as a value per US dollar. I save this $1,000 per year. Like, this basic stuff. And
Excuse me, Hassan, just because we have to open up our discussion to the audience here, may I ask you to make a concluding remark about this? Because I think you're making a very good point about cultural things.
Mm-hmm. That's another point that I want to really talk about, the culture. And this is one point. And, the Upward Group is really good for helping the professional with experience, some higher education back in home country, so they can prove it. They have a BA degree in something. So that's another point. They should, if there's a lot of university across the world that you may not heard about it. So that's the kind of university. They taught the people to be a professional, but it's not recognized in the United States. They help a narrow, amount of the people, of the migrants to the United States, people with some kind of really professional background, a certification, stuff like that. And there is another down level of the people, the migrant with no expertise. They really, the Lutheran Social Service, they really deal good with those people. And there is a majority of the people in the middle, the people that is not really, they don't have a really good certificate. And they really are not bad. They speak a kind of English. They have some kind of technical skills. But the problem is they cannot, translate all of this knowledge to the U.S. workforce. It's happened like that. They have expertise. They can find a job at the professional level. They not really bad to go start really basic jobs. They're in the middle. So most of those people start doing the Uber. And if you go, I don't know if you use the Uber. If you see the Uber, I use it. I use it twice. When I was at DC, it was 4 ride, go back to the job and get back, and I met 4 people. 2 of them were actually Afghan. I really get surprised. I just said, wow, this is Muhammad. Oh, I may know her. And I said, open the door. Hi, salam, khub hastin? It was through the name. So this is a real point. This is a real point. Nobody cares about this stuff. All of those people are doing some kind of, most of the time, 80% over. I know, if I can bring you an example. I can't, say the names.
Hassan, I think you're identifying a need that I wasn't aware of before. I think that job programs, or even just informally, those of us who like to help an immigrant find a job, have to tailor it to the person, and we can't just have one job program at an agency that applies to everyone. Hassan has mentioned this wonderful organization called Upwardly Global, and they are just the gold standard in my book for helping people with professional backgrounds find a job. Anyway, I hope you keep in mind those points that Hassan made about the cultural awareness that's involved in job seeking, because all of us who find it worthwhile to work with refugees and immigrants, we can all help with that kind of thing. We can all say, no, you have to look them in the eye, you know. So these are just a few of the things that we can help with. And now I'd like to hear from you. We have a few more minutes. If you have any questions for anyone on our panel, or maybe share a story of some experience you've had. Yes.
Hi, my name is Mary Beth Tyson. I was a Poland Peace Corps volunteer, but I work in the field of private sector development, and I've been working in Afghanistan on and off since 2004, but predominantly since 2010. And quite a few of my former colleagues, and now very dear friends have come to the U.S. on SIVs. And exactly what you're talking about are problems that I've been trying to help them with. People have significantly different levels of education and experience that will enable them to get different jobs here. And but what I have found is, for most of them, they need somebody who can really help go through their CVs and rewrite it in an American way. I mean, I've done a lot of hiring in Afghanistan on banking projects and SME development projects and all kinds of stuff. And CVs in Afghanistan they're not acceptable for me in Afghanistan, let alone here in the U.S. And so, when I'm telling them they got to cut down a 12-page CV to a page and a half, and I don't care anything about all those certificates that all the USAID projects handed you left and right, they all kind of go, oh, wow. And I've done interview practice sitting around my kitchen table with them, with people giggling, like, you're asking me these things. And I tried to reach out to another organization that was set up by some veterans to help Afghans and Iraqi SIVs. And, I got as far as one person speaking to me, and then the others who were supposed to follow up are just not interested. I think there's a huge group of people in the development sector who, first of all, owe the SIVs everything for what they've done for us there. And the way to pay it back is helping them here. And it's not just helping them with the CVs and helping them with interview techniques, but it's also teaching them to network. I mean, they have terrific networks. Afghans I knew who I thought knew better, they had worked with Americans for 8 years, their entire careers, didn't know that it was acceptable to come here and reach out to people in their LinkedIn list and say, I'm looking for a job. Can you take a look at my CV? Can you help me? Can you do anything? I actually went to NYU for business school. It's one of my friends from business school who pulled, one of my best Afghan friends' CVs out of the pile of 1,000 and gave it to the hiring manager and said, take a look at this guy. And he's now working there. So there's a huge amount we can do to help. We just need to get the right people together and connect them. It is, I think several of you have made the point, that isn't necessarily the experience of refugee resettlement organizations who are used to working with such a range of kind of professional levels. Maybe I'm wrong, but they don't, first of all, they're not all as proactive as what you guys are talking about. And so they really need that help. With respect to the spouses, even those who already know some English are kind of feeling like I did when I was in Poland, only I was on my own, and if I wanted to eat, I had to get out there. They're intimidated to go out on their own and go shopping or navigate the metro or stuff like that. We need people to kind of adopt families and start doing that sort of cultural assimilation. We have amazing resources in this area, in terms of English classes in local libraries and conversation classes that they could be attending if they felt more comfortable just getting on the bus and going over there.
May I comment on the tremendous importance is so obvious of learning English, but I mean, I occasionally hear somebody say, "Oh, these immigrants come here and they don't want to adapt. They don't want to learn English. They just want to stick to themselves." And there's nothing that makes me madder when I hear that, because I think we all know it's because they're working so hard at jobs. They cannot spare the time to go out and learn English if they have to work immediately. They may have a few months of English, but I think we need to think of new partnerships, new ways of offering English. For example, the first ESL teaching job I had was in Maine at a chicken factory where... Yes, okay.
Just before that, may I add some point on that?
May I actually add one thing on the SIV issue, just at a very basic level from a policy perspective? Congress has yet to allocate any visas for the Afghan SIV program. And so in addition to everything that Hassan and this lady are talking about, advocacy needs to be done around the fact that there are no visas allocated for this fiscal year for the program.
I just want to add there are a lot of organizations around the DC area who do offer English for foreigners, and they do look for volunteers. And in the one I've worked with in Manassas, they do especially good job of trying to help them understand the workplace and adjusting to the American issues that you're talking about. So for all of us, the opportunity to help teach in those places, it's either as volunteer or sometimes paid, I'd suggest that's a good way to get involved with some immigrants.
I'd like to see English classes brought to the workplace. There are such programs. That was my first teaching job. Partnering with maybe the local school district or something. It can be done.
May I add some little point here, because that's the time. Another issue is about the cultural orientation. I had a kind of cultural orientation, but that was I believe that was talking about how can I introduce me to different kind of bills, how can I but actually it should be some more cultural orientation. Most of the people come from the Afghanistan had a really different concept, thinking about the United States. They have no idea how the system working here. Back in Afghanistan, we don't have any health insurance, car insurance, so no cost. But here, one of the major costs for families who want to be independent as soon as possible is a health insurance. And if they find a job, they need to have a car and a car insurance. I had a problem like that. Somebody just hit my car, and I went and I sit and talk. She was really scared and said, please do not call the cops. And I said, I don't want you be in trouble. And when I called her insurance, they said, she told I hit his car. And that happened, cost me a lot. The simple, basic like this, the culture, the Afghan people, especially about the issues that you're talking about, some of them don't want to be adopted. Some of those don't want to be, find a job here because, they think differently. I am really lucky, knowing you, these good people is, a proof I'm a lucky guy, So most of the immigrants, Afghan refugee or refugee from Afghanistan, is not as lucky as I am. I'm talking to you. I have an opportunity to talk. I have an opportunity to meet really nice people like you. But believe me, most of the African people, they don't have this opportunity, this chance. How can I say it? This luck to meet some kind of good people, some kind of, I'm one of the few people in my community who actually have a volunteer who told me about all of this stuff, that I'm talking about you right now. So the cultural orientation should be more one of the points that you should focus more on it, because they have a really different concept of how stuff working in the United States. They think in a way that African people thinking about her environment back in Afghanistan. So it really should be. Okay.
So this is for Liz, I think. You already gave us one example through the visas that we should be advocating for. Can you give us a couple others that are a little bit more specific so we know what to say?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And actually, rather than specific, I'm going to go general, because our biggest ask regarding refugee resettlement is to maintain the integrity of their program, which means a few things. It means keeping it open. It means holding the administration accountable in reaching the refugee admission ceiling that they set for this fiscal year. As a reminder, that's 30,000. It's the lowest in the history of the program. Last year, that number was 45,000, and they reached 22,491. So we need to ensure that the administration is actually trying in good faith to meet the number. We'd like them to increase the refugee admission ceiling for 2020 to at least 75,000. That's what it started off as in FY16, and then it was bumped up to 85,000. And so they're actually really pretty simple asks. It's keep the program open, actually meet the ceiling that they've set, increase the PD, because we do have the capacity. PD is the presidential determination. That's what it's technically called. We do have the capacity to be doing more. And then also, we're talking about cultural orientation and ESL and all of these different things. These things can't happen without adequate funding. And so then the other ask would be to ensure that adequate funding is provided to refugee-related accounts at the federal level.
I want to say that both the HIAS and the LIRS websites are just so fantastic to me, learning about the issues, staying up to date on the issues, and learning how to do the advocacy. It's always made much simpler for you
And
just by going to the website.
I'm happy to. I do a lot of prep work with people who are going into legislative offices who maybe don't feel quite as comfortable as I do, because it's what I do, and I'm happy to be a resource for anybody who needs one.
We have some materials up just out beyond the doors there. As you leave, you may want to look at the table. We have some things on advocacy, some other things on ways you can become engaged with the Peace Corps community for refugees. I want to thank everybody so very much for coming here. It's really great to hear Mandy, Veronica, and our panel here. It's a wonderful evening, and thank you to NYU. It's lovely here, and the food is great downstairs, upstairs. If you want to go, I think there must be some food and drink left up there. Thank you.